One of Ninjago's most iconic villains became a very big talking point within Season 3 of Dragon's Rising. Of course, that is Morro. He made his return and actually had a few scenes within Part 1. But the final scene that we actually saw him in has caused a lot of different questions to arise, because the last time we seen him, he was having his soul absorbed by Thunderfang, and we have had nothing since, and people are definitely curious as to what's going to happen from here onwards. But his fate is unknown, and the writers, as far as I'm aware, haven't really acknowledged Morro in recent time, and it's caused a lot of speculation. But I do think, unfortunately speaking, we may be looking at a very bad scenario when it does come to this character. So I want to talk about what's most likely going to happen, and what I wish did happen. So let's talk about the tragic end of Morro. Before we do discuss what is most likely going to happen when it does come to his character, we need to discuss where he actually came from. People were curious as to whether or not Morro would ever be able to return in the show. A lot of people have wanted to see his character back, and the writers were definitely alluding to the fact that something could have happened with Morro. They essentially said that anything could happen in Ninjago, so basically to stay tuned. A lot of people saw this as passive confirmation that Morro would make some form of return, and especially considering now that Andrew Francis is a mainstay in the Ninjago cast, it definitely did feel more likely. And then we actually had the Season 3 sets come out, or more specifically the Part 1 sets, where there was a figure looking awfully similar to our beloved villain. And it was in fact Morro. It was confirmed that Morro was in one of these sets, sporting a brand new look. And to say the least, fans were extremely excited because it seems to be that he was going to return. And he did. He returned in the episode The Spectral Lands, where we got to see him help Aaron through the Spectral Lands to actually obtain the Elixir of Life to save Raz. And people were absolutely ecstatic. They were so happy to see Morro actually interacting with a newer character. And we even got some references to his past events. They never really said anything outright. He never really mentioned the ninja fully by name. He mentioned Wu, but that was basically it. A lot of people were fairly happy with this though, and were definitely hoping to see more of him, but unfortunately, he kind of remains within the bounds of his own episode. He did have a final scene at the very end of Part 1 where we see his soul being absorbed, but that was basically it in terms of his physical appearances within the show. And people were happy with it, but it was definitely showing signs that that might have potentially been it, and they didn't really intend on doing much more with him. The first major red flag that did come to this was the fact that Andrew Francis wasn't actually credited as playing Morro. He was credited as playing a departed soul. A lot of people were noting the fact that Morro wasn't stated by name. Morro wasn't directly acknowledged, and people attributed this as the potential that they may not even have been wanting to bring him back in a full capacity. And the other major aspect that did come from this was the fact that whilst he was acknowledging Wu, he never really outright acknowledges his whole events within the course of Ninjago. He doesn't acknowledge much else beyond the transitional stuff that we need to know about Wu. It's only mentioned because it does serve plot relevance, and a lot of people were wondering if he was just simply a device that was attached with an iconic name just to draw people in. This was no further amplified by the fact that in Part 2 we never actually see any sort of resolution when it does come to his character. We never see his soul return, we never see him reappear, he never even has a scene, and he's never acknowledged in any capacity. He is just simply gone by this point. He is nothing more when it does come to the story, and that was honestly a massive shame. But again, it definitely did strike a lot of fear in a lot of people's minds. Because since then the question has been raging on. What is going to happen tomorrow? What is going to be with this character? Are they going to have him return? Are they going to do anything with him? Who entirely knows? And like I said, the writers, as of the time of filming, hasn't acknowledged it. So unfortunately, I am here to break it to you that I do think this is it when it does come to the character. This is of course all going to be speculation. This is not coming from any sort of fact. This is not coming from any sort of information that we do know. This is purely theory. But the thing is that it seems to be that he was only there for plot transition. He seems to be that he was only there to deliver information to Aaron and help Aaron throughout the course of his episode. If they were fully intended on a Morro return, I feel like they would have been more outright and honestly more nostalgic when it does come to the character. I feel like we would have had so much more said and so much more done, and at the very least had him acknowledged by name. But that is the point, they didn't, and that is why, unfortunately, I think the most likely scenario for Morro is that he just simply doesn't come back. He obviously ends up back in the Spectral Lands because he's free of Thunderfang, but I don't think we'll actually get it outright acknowledged. It may be acknowledged on something like Blue Sky, but I think that will basically be it. I don't think we're going to get any sort of recurring scenes. The thing about Dragon's Rising is that unless it's something like the Monastery, we don't tend to go back to certain locations, so whether or not we even go back to the Spectral Lands, I do think is up for debate. But that's why I think, unfortunately, Morro is just simply going to be now put by the wayside. I don't think he will return in any capacity. I want to be wrong, and I thoroughly hope that I am, but I just don't see it going in any other sense. But that does lead to another hypothetical. How could they have handled Morro? How could they have shown him off in Season 3 Part 2? How could they have had him in the future? That is the ultimate question, and I do have a vague idea onto what I would want it to see. In terms of his presence in Season 3, I think he should have had a scene within Part 2. I think we should have seen him reappear after Thunderfang was destroyed, and I think a scene between him and Lloyd would have been fairly interesting. Not as a nostalgia bait, not as a way to bait in some sort of weird emotion, I think more just to really set things up more with Wu. Of course, Aaron did inform Lloyd about the fact that Wu never passed through the Spectral Lands, and that's all well and good, but it would have been really cool if we could have had Morro essentially set up Lloyd's drive to really prioritize finding Wu, figuring out what happened to him, and figuring out where he truly did end up. Almost like a warning, almost like Morro basically saying that you need to find Wu to figure out what is truly going on, and to really solve things that's going on within Dragon's Rising. I think it would have been a really cool setup, and definitely would have had Morro at least be confirmed to still be around, but also just have him have some form of payoffs for being in the season itself. This alone would have just cleared up so much for me, and I could have comfortably have gone from that point without seeing Morro, but I think that at the very minimum was it, especially considering that Morro was the last thing that we saw in Season 3 Part 1. Not having him back in Part 2 just felt honestly really wrong, and it's just a shame that that never actually came to be the case. But what about a post-Season 3 world? Of course, Morro by all accounts is completely bound within the scope of the Spectral Lands. He's not really meant to be leaving. He is the guardian, he is the protector, he is the ambassador of the Spectral Lands itself. He's very committed to that task, and I don't think in a post-Season 3 world we would have seen him leave to join the ninja. I just think it would have been really cool to have him remain there, but also remain essentially in contact with the ninja. Have some form of alliance be made between the two where he would have assisted in terms of what could have happened in the future. Of course, that is extremely reliant on if the Spectral Lands did return, and like I said earlier, it may not even be the case. But say if they do want to do more with the Spectral Lands, it would have been cool if Season 3 sets up an alliance between the ninja and Morro. Have Morro actually be there if the ninja did require it, and have him have some sort of relevance going forward. It could have had really cool implications, and it definitely could have done more in terms of the redemption of Morro, which is obviously something that's been set up since the 5th season of the show. I think it just would have made a lot of sense to actually have Morro have some sort of place within Dragon's Rising. Not in the most prevalent sense, but just something there that could have truly have done something. I know a lot of people said that he should have been the one that taught Euphrasia, and that also would have been really cool. But I just think, in general, it should have had something and some sort of impact on how the ninja acts from there onwards. But like I said, it doesn't seem to be that that's going to be the case, and I do think it is an ultimate shame. But on an overall, I do think we will not see Morro anymore. As much as this scenario I do like the sound of, I just don't think he's a character that may even return. I think he's just going to fall by the wayside, because like I said, it feels like they didn't really want to have him there to begin with. Like I said, so many different factors really have played into my belief that Morro wasn't really specified in terms of what they wanted for the character. It just felt like he was made of a choice because it would sell a set. And that is ultimately extremely disappointing, but at least we got him in some capacity. But honestly, if we don't see Morro again, I wouldn't be surprised. But what is your opinion on Morro's involvement within Dragon's Rising? Did you like the capacity he was in, or did you want to see more like me? I would be curious to know if anyone is happy with what he actually had and are comfy going on without him. It's a very interesting thing, and I would like to know what people do think, because as for me, I am just definitely left wanting more. But thank you very much for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people. And if you do want to support the channel any further, which you don't have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends on screen. Thank you to each and every single one of you. I am eternally thankful. But like I said, that is about it for today, and take care. Okay, bye!